I could hear the conversation that was going on behind a closed folding door that separated the kitchen from our living room. My mother had brewed coffee for the meeting, and my father had gone to a local bakery to get some fresh donuts and told me I could have one when they were done. "It's the chance for a fresh start," I heard the man say. He went on to explain that in exchange for my father's testimony, we would be enrolled in the Witness Protection Program. We'd be moved to another part of the country, given new names, and my father would be given a job. My mother asked, "Are you the one who'll decide where we'll go?" "No," he said, "I'm just the agent who processes your paperwork." Soon after, the door opened and the man walked through, and my father followed him and gestured for me to join as they walked to the front door. When we got there, I saw another man standing guard there and noticed that the two men looked identical in dark suits and white shirts and ties. My father turned to the man and asked, "How long do I have to decide?" And he answered, 2 weeks, but the sooner the better, really. We'll move your wife and daughter first, probably in about a month, and then you'll join them after the trials are done." My father thanked them politely and shook their hands, and we watched as they walked over to a big black sedan that was parked across from the house. After they drove away, my father put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Well, I guess we better go talk to your mother." So we got into the kitchen and we found her washing dishes, and my father grabbed a jelly donut and put it on a plate for me and slid it over, and he took a cruller for himself. My stomach was all tensed up, and I couldn't do anything but lick the sugar off my fingers. I'm going to step aside at this point because I think it's here. So my stomach had tensed up, and all I could do was lick the sugar off my fingers. "Go ahead," my father urged. "Take a bite." At that, my mother spun around from the sink and threw the dish towel down on the table and said, "You better enjoy that donut because you won't be getting any more donuts from Sal's Bakery after we move." My father jumped up in surprise and said, "Who said we're moving?" "I didn't say we were moving." My mother put her hands on her hips and said, "Well, what was he here for if we're not moving? You've already decided for us, right?" "I haven't decided anything," my father said. "I thought we should hear what he had to say, and then we could talk about it." My mother pulled the chair up from the table and sat down and said, "All right, let's talk about it." She told me to leave the room, but my father insisted that I stay. "It affects her," he said. "And besides, she's going to find out about it anyway. She might as well start now." It was the first time I had been invited into a conversation with my parents. I was 10 years old. My mother started right away with her concerns. "We'll never find fresh bread and cold cuts and cannoli like we do in the North End." My father laughed at her, and she said, "Oh, go ahead, make fun of the food. But what will our names be?" He shrugged and said he didn't know, but he offered names like Adams or Miller. That had my mother shrieking. "American names? Are you serious? Do we look American?" My father softened and suggested maybe he could get the names of their mothers, which were Russo or Mandra. No, he shook his head. They'd never allow that because somebody would figure it out. They went on to talk about the places we might live, like California, Texas, or Kansas. I was giddy at the thought of living on the Pacific Ocean. But all I knew about Kansas I had learned from The Wizard of Oz. And I knew I didn't look anything like Dorothy or her farm family. So I figured we'd stand out no matter where we were, and that would be a problem. I thought back to the last time we weren't safe. I was 7 years old, and my father had owed money to loan sharks, which he couldn't repay. So he disappeared, leaving my mother and I alone in a third-floor apartment overlooking the ocean in South Boston. Every day I'd walk home from school and I'd see a black Cadillac parked outside with two men inside wearing dark suits and white shirts and ties. And as soon as I got to the top of the stairs, the phone would start to ring, and I'd pick it up, and a man would be on the other end and he'd ask for my father. And I'd say he wasn't home, and hang up. And the phone would ring again and again. And it got to the point where I just didn't even say hello anymore. I would just wait for him to hang up, and then I'd be standing there with the receiver in my hand, wondering if I should reach up and put it back on the hook or just let it hang there. Once the men followed me to the door, and insisted my father had to be home because I was too young to be left home alone. And after that, when I walked home, I would run down the street to the front door and up the stairs to the room farthest from the phone and crouch down under the window where they couldn't see me and wait until my mother got home. A few days later, after the meeting in the kitchen, my father went to talk to his parents about the decision he had to make. And when he got home, he said to us, "My mother just cried. But Pa reminded me of something he once did to keep us safe. And he told me I should do what I have to do." Now, I knew this story really well. My grandparents left a good life and a thriving farm in Sicily to come to this country when my father was 5 years old, because his older brothers came home wearing the brown shirts of Mussolini's army. My grandmother took one look at them and told my grandfather they had to leave because she was not, even though Mussolini had made the trains run on time, she was not going to let her boys die in a war led by a fascista. So they sold everything that they had within a month, booked passage on a boat, and came to this country even though they couldn't read, write, or speak a word of English. I looked over at my father, who was slouched in a chair at this point, and my mother shrilled, "What are we going to do?" And my father reached over to me, and he grabbed my hand, and he softly repeated the question, "What are we going to do?" I was so overwhelmed that he asked. I just spilled out everything that I had in my head. The FBI men looked just like the bad men who used to follow me. How am I going to tell the difference between the good men and the bad men? How is the FBI going to keep us safe? Are they going to watch us all the time? And at that, my father stood up, and he got confident again, and he pointed at me and he said, "You're right. Nobody can keep us safe except me." My father refused to testify, and instead spent nearly 3 years in a federal penitentiary. While he was gone, our life was very difficult, but his silence kept us free from danger. And on the day he got out, my mother couldn't leave work early. So I ran home from school, and when I heard the knock on the door, I opened it, and he looked surprised when he saw me. "You've grown up," he said. And he stood there kind of awkwardly, and I felt the same way, so I opened the door just a little wider to let him in. And he reached his arms out to me, and he said, "Well, I guess this is our fresh start."